In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E.
Half a day, everyone, and welcome to another edition of In Full Zoom. Our guest this week is attorney Neil Weare, former resident of Guam and now based in the mainland. And he's been working on some pretty compelling topics lately that has to do with birthright citizenship. And we want to talk about how that might relate to Guam's own quest for self-determination and the insular cases and all of those complicated things. So hopefully Neil will be able to explain that all to us. Neil, thanks for joining us.
Half a day, Nestor. Thanks so much for having me.
I appreciate your being here. Tell us a little bit about the most recent thing that you've been working on. This is regarding birthright citizenship. Can you tell us a little bit about that case? I believe it involves an American Samoa resident, correct?
Yeah, we represent John Fidisimanu and other individuals born in the U.S. territory of American Samoa. And the federal government, under a discriminatory statute, does not actually recognize them as U.S. citizens the way people in Guam are recognized as citizens at birth, but instead labels them with this inferior second-class status of non-citizen national. So they're U.S. nationals, they owe permanent allegiance to the United States and all the obligations that come with that, but they don't have the rights that come with citizenship. And so John Fidisimanu actually lives in Utah now. And while he's moved to the States, he still can't vote for president, can't vote for his own governor, much less even school board members, because the federal government has denied him recognition of citizenship guaranteed to him under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, and instead imposed this inferior status of non-citizen national.
Yeah, that's even more strange, for lack of a better word, than on Guam, because if we move to a U.S. state, we would have all of the rights, correct, of a full U.S. citizenship.
Yeah, exactly. But it speaks to a broader issue that is very relevant to the people of Guam and other territories is, does Congress have the power to deny citizenship to people born on U.S. soil in the territories? And the federal government's position, the Biden-Harris Department of Justice, just argued this last week in a filing to the U.S. Supreme Court that indeed Congress could take away citizenship for people in all of the territories, not just American Samoa. But if Congress changed its mind tomorrow, they could deny citizenship to people in Guam as well. And that's extremely troubling.
Yeah. So what are you asserting in your client's case? What resolution are you seeking?
So our appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court raises two really fundamental issues. One is whether people born in U.S. territories have a right to citizenship at all. And second, whether the Supreme Court should overrule the insular cases. And these are a series of racist Supreme Court cases from the early 1900s that established a status of separate and unequal for residents of the territories. And recently, the Supreme Court has indicated, or at least some justices on the Supreme Court have indicated a willingness to overrule what Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor called these odious decisions. And just a week after Justice Sotomayor and Justice Gorsuch said the insular cases should be overruled, we filed our appeal expressly asking whether or not the insular cases should be overruled.
Yeah, and that's interesting. You mentioned those two justices because they happen to be on kind of opposite sides of the spectrum. Gorsuch, of course, considered more conservative, and Sotomayor more liberal. But let's dig deeper into the insular cases because we make reference to that a lot when we report on issues such as this. But I think, including myself, don't have a complete understanding of what the insular cases are. And as you said, Justice Sotomayor referred to them as very odious and racist, as a matter of fact. So give us the background on the insular cases, when they first came out, how they came about, and why they're still in place.
Yeah, so the insular cases are, as I said, a series of Supreme Court decisions decided in the early 1900s. They came following United States expansion overseas after the Spanish-American War, when the United States acquired Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. And the United States has had territories from the very beginning. So one of the first laws passed by the very first Congress of the United States after the Constitution was ratified was the Northwest Ordinance Act, establishing the Northwest Territories. And so the United States has always had territories, and the understanding has been that territorial status was a temporary status, that the Constitution extended to those areas, and that eventually they would either become full and equal members as states, or they would be disposed of in some other way and no longer be part of the United States. But after the Spanish-American War, the United States found itself in a position where they wanted to have these overseas colonies. They wanted to join the imperial club of, Great Britain and Spain. And the only thing standing in the way between that colonial vision being a reality was, of course, the US Constitution, itself a very anti-colonial document, drafted and ratified, after the 13 US colonies declared their independence from the colonial power of Great Britain. And these issues eventually came up to the Supreme Court to say, essentially, can the United States have colonies? And the legal issues in the cases were, pretty arcane. So the most famous of the cases, Downs versus Bidwell, involved a shipment of a bag of oranges from Puerto Rico to New York, and addressed whether certain taxes could be levied on those oranges. And from that basis, the Supreme Court ruled quite broadly, establishing this distinction between so-called incorporated and so-called unincorporated territories, with territories like Guam being labeled unincorporated. And what that meant in the court's view was that not all provisions of the Constitution necessarily applied of their own force. And perhaps equally importantly, these areas were not on a path to either full equality or independence, but could be held essentially in perpetuity in this colonial status. And now, over 120 years later, that's essentially still where we are today. The Supreme Court justices have criticized the Insular Cases decisions, but they've yet to overrule them. And our case, Fidesimano versus the United States, provides that opportunity for the court to finally take action and address this problem that the Supreme Court itself created in the early 1900s.
In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E. GU Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information. In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E.
Give us some ideas of where the court might grow from here. What are the things that they are considering, and what are their options in terms of a ruling?
So in our case, John Fidesimano won his case at the federal district court level, with the district court judge recognizing that people born in U.S. territories have a constitutional right to citizenship. The 10th Circuit Court of Appeals reversed that decision in a split decision, with two of the judges relying on the Insular Cases to say that there's no right to citizenship in the territories, one of the judges agreeing with the district court. And so now where we're at is we filed a petition to the Supreme Court requesting that they review that decision. And so this is a situation where the Supreme Court hears lots of appeals and grants very few, but it's not very often where you have a circuit court decision where the three judges actually all disagree with each other. There are three separate opinions where they reverse a lower court judge like this. And so, we're hopeful that, particularly based upon the statements that Justice Gorsuch and Justice Sotomayor have recently made, that the Supreme Court may finally be ready to review in what some ways is its own dirty laundry, the Insular cases, and really the racist legacy of colonialism that they established that continues to impact the lives of people in Guam and other territories in so many different ways today.
Yeah. Can you relate that back to how it might impact Guam's self-determination?
Yeah, so what the Insular cases have stood for is that that Congress and the federal government have no duty to ever address the political status of its territories, that they can, in effect, continue to hold them as colonies in perpetuity. And so the Insular cases actually have stood as this obstacle to the exercise of self-determination and the resolution of political status. And one of the things we're hopeful for is that if the Supreme Court are to take up our case and overrule the Insular cases, that would send a powerful signal to the political branches, to President Biden, to Congress, that it's time to finally take serious the idea of self-determination and the importance of resolving the political status of the territories. 3.6 million people live in US territories today. That's a population of those 5 territories greater than the population of the 5 smallest states. And so this is a serious issue that should be given focus by the federal government. And they just simply haven't to this date, largely because of the excuse of the Insular cases gives them to really not do anything. So that's one of the hopes of what can flow from the Supreme Court taking up these issues.
I have heard over the years that in terms of the self-determination issue of the territories, is that it's really Puerto Rico that is kind of the big dog in the room, if you will. That as goes Puerto Rico, so goes the rest of the much smaller territories. Has there been any movement in terms of what Puerto Rico is going to be doing?
Yeah, this Congress has actually seen quite a bit of movement on the issue of self-determination in Puerto Rico and political status. And so there's been a number of bills introduced over the last 2 years to allow residents of Puerto Rico to decide their own future. And importantly, there was recently a compromise between the leaders of the different political status perspectives in Puerto Rico, reaching a resolution or a compromise on having an actual binding plebiscite that would decide between statehood, independence, and free association that has been voted out of committee in the House and has recently faced some obstacles. So it's not clear whether it will actually get a vote in the House. On the Senate side, absent getting rid of the filibuster because of Republican opposition to that bill, it seems unlikely to pass there. But it's really an important step forward to recognize that in order to move forward these issues, there really has to be a binding plebiscite. I mean, why ask the people of Puerto Rico or Guam what political status you want if there's no commitment from Congress to follow through on that? It's like asking a hypothetical of, you know, which mansion do you want? You know, the one with gold encrusting, the one with diamonds on the roof, or the one with crystals all over the exterior. If it's just a hypothetical, it's no surprise that people in the territories don't deeply engage in these questions if it's something that Congress isn't actually going to follow through on. But if Congress were to actually say, here are the 3 options, here are what they look like, which one do you want? It really gives people in the territories the opportunity to really begin addressing these issues. And like I said, there's been some progress there, but I think until the Insular cases are overruled, it's going to be very difficult to get Congress and the president to take any kind of serious action on questions of political status and self-determination in the territories, so long as they have that excuse.
In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E. GU Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information. In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E.
Yeah, and a plebiscite, as you say, it'd be nothing more because it has no force of law. Then it's as you say. But let me go back to the Puerto Rico question, though. Is it more a political issue because the Republicans view it as a probably a more of a Democratic stronghold? Is it? Does that what it really come down to, Neil?
I think that's the way the conversation within the Beltway in DC kind of goes, but it's really kind of confusing to me how it's developed that way. Because after all, their current representative in Congress, Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, she's a Republican. She's the most popular elected official in Puerto Rico. And if they had an election for the U.S. Senate tomorrow, it's almost certain she would be elected for that role. So Puerto Rico, like Guam, like some of the other territories, really are populated by swing voters. I mean, Guam's had more Republican governors than we've had Democratic. Each of the territories kind of goes back and forth between having, Democrats representing them in Congress and Republicans. So it's not something that should be partisan or politicized, but somehow it has been. And I think that's one of the important things that folks from the territories from both political parties can educate their colleagues in Washington to say, hey, look, whether you're support Democrats or support Republicans, you can compete for those votes in the territories. And there's no reason to deny US citizens participation and government by consent in their government. So that's why we, support advancing voting rights, advancing equality, even as these broader questions of political status and self-determination continue forward.
Yeah, and they say timing is everything. And in this case, if Puerto Rico were to elect statehood and were to become a state, those two senators could be very much, a deciding factor in the current Senate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're in a very politically divided time, which makes any kind of controversial or divisive topic all the more difficult. But it really shouldn't be that controversial, the idea that if you're a US citizen under the US flag, you should be able to vote for president, that you should have representation in the Congress that makes the laws you must follow. I mean, just reading, the newspaper in Guam, you see stories about how Guam is, being under threat from China or North Korea, tensions in Asia around Taiwan. And to think that the people of Guam have no representation or say in the decisions in Washington that could put their very lives at risk is so contrary to America's founding democratic and constitutional principles. The reason I got interested in these issues was in high school at Ocean View and Southern High. When I turned 18, I had to register for the draft, but couldn't vote for president. The things I was reading about in US history, US government textbooks was not being reflected in our community. And I think it's, and that's where I think both Justice Gorsuch and Justice Sotomayor can come together, and conservatives and liberals can come together and say, there are certain basic foundational principles of American democracy and our constitutional values that simply are not being lived out in the way the United States treats people in the territories, that the United States has a duty and obligation to address, even as the people in each of the territories have these conversations among themselves about what they want their future political relationship with the United States to be.
Do you think there's been an ambivalence among a lot of the people on Guam who may not think of Washington as other than, some federal government far, far away, and this whole idea of self-determination doesn't have a lot of importance to me? Do you see that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it ambivalence as much as feeling defeated. The people of Guam have gone to the federal government and expressed, what they've wanted in the past, just to be dismissed by Congress out of hand. Things like the Commonwealth, quest for self-determination in the 80s and 90s. And then even, recently with the political status plebiscite that's been canceled as a result of federal court decisions. And that's where I think there is this opportunity with what's happening in Puerto Rico, with this idea of having a binding federal plebiscite that clearly sets forth the options, what they mean, what a closer relationship with the United States looks like, what a separate relationship from the United States looks like, and lets people decide in a way that actually determines their future. That's really what self-determination is, not just asking, not kind of doing a poll, or not is like theoretically, what is it that you would like? There needs to be some consequence in order to get people to really engage the way I think they want to, but the way that they most certainly won't if their vote and voice don't actually make a difference.
In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises Inc. and IT&E. GU Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information. In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises Inc. and IT&E.
Yeah. Do you think the military buildup here and the increasing importance of Guam because of our strategic location in the Indo-Pacific and the threat of China, does that help or hurt that self-determination movement?
I think it mostly helps. I mean, on the one hand, it's, I think, really opened up a lot of people's eyes to what the power dynamic is between the federal government and the people of Guam, with many of these decisions being made with respect to the military buildup without really a meaningful voice from the community. I mean, obviously, there are military bases all throughout the United States, but the big difference is, those communities have senators and voting members of Congress and can vote for president. And so that creates some, kind of checks and balances in terms of the way the military approaches those communities. And then, beyond that, it gives the people of Guam leverage. I mean, Guam is an incredible strategic importance. And whether that's leverage is used towards building a closer, more equal relationship with the United States, or creating a separate relationship that's, equal with the United States and the community of nations, it puts Guam in a good position in order to have those difficult conversations with the United States on more of an equal playing field.
Yeah, I wanted to extend this out to the freely associated states. They are, of course, not territories of the U.S. They are, as I said, freely associated states. But does your case have any implications for them?
Not directly, but I do think that, what you had just said about kind of the strategic importance of these areas. President Biden, I believe, in the next week or two, or he just announced having a meeting in Washington, D.C. with leaders from the Pacific to, address kind of these ongoing threats from China and other countries, that really is the kind of center of geostrategic importance has really shifted to the Pacific. Yeah. And leaders of Micronesia and Palau have recognized that they have some leverage here that they can use to get a better deal with the United States. So as the compacts of free association are renegotiated, I think the United States realizes it's going to have to come to the table and present a good deal to the people of these island communities. And that's what's really missing in Guam, is that in the absence of anything that forces those conversations to happen, the United States kind of just takes for granted that it can do whatever it wants without any consequences on the island. And that's why conversations around self-determination and political status are important, even as these court cases go on, defining what their current relationship actually is. Because how can you decide what you want your future to be if you don't actually know what the current relationship looks like? And so having the Supreme Court provide some explanation of what that current status means can help people decide, do we like that? Do we want something different? Do we want a closer relationship with the United States? Do we want a separate relationship from the United States? And those are all good options. I think, all the options that the people of Guam are considering to move beyond this colonial status will present the people of Guam with a better future for having both a control and say over their own island, but also having the ability to have these more equal conversations and negotiations with the United States and other countries.
Sure. And finally, speaking of the Supreme Court, what's your gut feeling? Are they going to take your case?
We're feeling good about it. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why you could think the court would. There's some reasons why they may not. The court's going to be taking this up towards the beginning of October. And so we'll know in the next few months. We've got a lot of support and push from folks in Guam. Former Governor Paul Gutierrez, I understand it's he and his wife's 60th anniversary today. So happy anniversary on that. And other folks like former Chief Justice B.J. Cruz, Kaleo Moylan, and others. So it's bipartisan. All calling on the court to overrule the Inster cases and recognize the right to citizenship. So we'll keep our fingers crossed, keep pushing, and encourage folks to continue supporting these efforts to address these big issues.
All right, Attorney Neil Weare, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
All right, I'm Nestor Licanto. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you again next week on In Full Zoom.
In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E.